hotel, do you see the road? I'm out to my soul into the size whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect. You do it. All of that green together, the truth, yeah. When I tell you the
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the third part of What If Hazbinhotel Meets Binding of Isaac. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Gamer95 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Verosika wanted to ask a lot of things, the main one being how she would use her items, and why she needs a bigger space, but decided that he would find out as he went. Okay, listen, there's a solution I think, she announced herself, calling everyone's attention. Wait, solution? Which one? Kini asked. Apparently for her problem with the whole thing, regarding the holy light or so I think. What exactly are you talking about, miss? Colin asked, as confused as the rest. Well, it's not my idea, but Isaac's, he's the one with the plan, Verosika said trying to explain as best she could, but the three angels looked clearly confused. She just sighed, but she didn't say anything, she understood why they were confused, and in part she was a little confused too. Look, I can't explain it, because you have to see it to believe it, but for now, let's get in my car, and find a big place, preferably away from prying eyes. But Cletus tried to protest but Vortex cut him off. No buts, you heard the boss, get in the car, because the little one has the solution, he said firmly, but kindly. The three cherubs had no energy to argue, and if they got into the car of two demons, and whatever this Isaac was, even in an unknown and secluded place, it could have been the biggest stupid thing ever imagined. At this point, apart from not having any other options, the three of them had shown in a short time to be more trustworthy than most of the people they had met up to now, including many from heaven. The three of them looked at each other before accepting, and they walked away, because they were too tired to use their wings, and they got into Verosika's car, occupying the back seat next to Isaac. Colin in the right window, Cletus in the right window. Isaac and Kini side between the two aforementioned cherubs, while Vortex was driving and Verosika was the co-driver. After searching for a place on the cell phone for a while, and finding an abandoned industrial complex, not far from the location, they started the car and headed there. While Vortex was driving, both he and Verosika had the same idea. How would Isaac help them not to lose this sacred light? Did he really have something in his repertoire to help them with that? How big was his repertoire? She ruled out that he was going to use that watch, because if that were the case, why does he need a spacious place for that? Whatever Isaac was planning, she and the others would find out soon enough, for now, there were other questions she could ask while they got to the place. Seeing through the rearview mirror, how Isaac wrote and erased in his notebook, if Verosika had to bet, surely, he was finishing polishing the details of the solution for the cherubs, while Cletus and Kini watched what the boy was doing, apparently not understanding at all because of the confused looks, and Colin was looking out the window. So how did you three get dirty in that rickety van? Verosika asked, calling the attention of the three, while Isaac continued writing in his notebook. The cherubs took a while to respond, until Cletus, whom Verosika understood was the de facto leader of the three, began to explain. Well, you see, after we were expelled, we didn't have anywhere to go, and after a lot of touring the city, the van was our best option in the end. It had no wheels, the windows were broken, it smelled strange, but in the end at least it was warm and protected from the rain. But why being in a rickety van in an alley of all places? Wouldn't it have been preferable, I don't know, an abandoned house, or a church? I'm sure you guys would have welcomed them, Verosika questioned him, a bit confused. Well, yes, in theory yes, but we weren't very sure how to get in contact with mortals, also in reality if we found an abandoned church or rather the church called us without us noticing. Cletus said. This caused Verosika to raise an eyebrow and ask. Wait, how come the church called you without you noticing? The priest saw you and asked you to come. But Kini quickly corrected her. No, it's not that. The church was abandoned, for what seemed like decades, and in the end it was obvious why, explained the lamb in yellow, and her blue partner continued. We felt attracted, by some kind of force, and we ignored all the signs that it was not a simple abandoned temple. The time we spent there, we were always bitter, full of hatred, and a powerful envy, to those responsible for this, that they could return to their homes with their loved ones, to continue being happy, while we were trapped in that place. Those feelings were present, in an unnatural way, continued Cletus. And how did they know that this was a supernatural place, and not the situation they went through? Asked the succubus. We didn't know until a few weeks ago. There were screams all over the church. We don't know how, but it just started to collapse, and suddenly, those feelings were gone. They were still there, but now in a lesser degree, and we escaped before the church. The earth will swallow it and it will explode. Verosika, now very interested, turned to see them. Did they really go through that? She asked with wide eyes. We know it sounds crazy, but it's the truth. After that we wandered until we got to that van, and we ate what the restaurants threw away, that wasn't so expired, until you found us, Colin explained. Verosika looked at them in amazement, and after thinking about it for a while, she answered. No, I believe you, the same thing happened to us, and to other people around the world. Cletus, Colin and Kini looked at her curiously, urging her to continue. She let out a sigh. So long and short of it is, Isaac's house sank into a hellhole shortly after I found him. I dunno what exactly caused it, but I'm pretty sure Isaac had something to do with it. The three cherubs looked at the boy with tilted heads. That little guy? Kini asked. Where would he get that much power though? Colin asked. Why, he'd have to have power on par with one of the Lord's children. Cletus exclaimed. Verosika, seeing that the cherubs misinterpreted her word, corrected the three. No, you misunderstood. When I said that Isaac had something to do with it, he meant that he was related, not that he was directly responsible for it. And what kind of relationship do you think Isaac would have with that? Do you have any idea? Kini asked. Verosika took a moment to answer, as if she was thinking, but in the end she answered. Victim, she said, narrowing her eyes, in a calmly funereal manner, devoid of any joy or energy, but the presence of anger, despair, sadness was powerful, but silent and discreetly present, although with a certain glimpse certainly, it was all that could be detected in that single word. The three cherubs shuddered, both by the way Verosika responded, and by the answer itself. They looked better at Isaac, who seemed not to be paying attention and continued writing and erasing things in his notebook, and when doing that the three saw that he still had some bandages, as well as a scar on his neck. If they had listened better, they would have paid attention to the doubt in Verosika's voice, and it is that a part of her doubted that Isaac was only the victim of the monsters that tortured him so horribly. It was definitely one, but after seeing everything what Isaac had been able to do so far, and what he was going to do for the cherubs, she suspected there was more to it than just horrible torture, but she had no answer at the moment. Although Isaac's drawings had given some information about the past, so far they hadn't been much help. In addition, she still had to review the other drawings in detail. After seeing Isaac, Colin, and with great difficulty he asked. What exactly do you mean? That's something I prefer to tell you later, preferably when Isaac isn't around, since I don't want him to relive those memories. He already has enough with the nightmares he has to face, she replied, causing the cherubs to be surprised and horrified in parts. The same, but they decided not to inquire further into the subject, until Verosika decided to tell them about the situation, since it seemed that it was an extremely delicate subject. After a while the car arrived at its destination, which seemed to be a factory that was abandoned a long time ago. The rust and the vegetation claiming different parts of the structure was proof of this. Vortex was the first to get out of the car, and after checking that there was not a soul nearby, he opened the door for Verosika, the cherubs, and Isaac to get out. Entering was not difficult at all, since the gate was open, and allowed access to the abandoned facility. They entered with Verosika carrying Isaac in his arms, and in turn he carried little Chad and his notebook in each arm, while the cherubs closely followed them. They came to a large, empty building. It seemed to have been a warehouse of some kind a long time ago. Vortex looked to see if there was no one inside or if there was something dangerous, since there was no door, and when he verified that there was no one, he gave the go-ahead to Verosika, who brought Isaac closer so that he could see the warehouse himself. "Okay, what does it say it's good for whatever you've got planned?" she asked, to which Isaac raised his thumb while giving her a smile. Verosika put it down, and before leaving, the boy handed her the notebook and little Chad to her, who greeted her with a small, pre-3, when he saw her. "Okay, remind me why we came here instead of going to a hotel?" Vortex asked, approaching her, while Isaac walked around the place. "For a lot of reasons, the main one being that I'm not sure what Isaac is going to do, and I'm not sure if they end up burning something or not. Besides," then she moved closer to Vortex and whispered to him softly, "if what he's doing turns out to be too painful and they start screaming, no one here will listen." The three cherubs looked at her, sensing that she was talking about them, and tilted their heads curiously. She simply nodded in their direction, then turned to Isaac as he seemed to be taking a close look at the place, ready to do whatever he was planning. It took him a couple of minutes to finish what looked like he was preparing, and when he did, he nodded in satisfaction. After that, the five looked at Isaac, who went to a part of the warehouse and spread his hands in front of him. The cherubs were curious what he was trying to do, but they didn't have time to ask. Just a few moments later, a smoke explosion occurred in front of him, surprising them. The cherubs went from surprised and confused, to stunned, as a stone pedestal appeared in front of Isaac, and floating unnaturally was what left them in shock, as did Verosika and Vortex still. Then to a lesser extent. It was a ball of golden light, which seemed solid as it was partially wrapped by some kind of sky-blue silk cloth, and the most striking detail was the pair of pure white angel wings, which sprouted from the sphere of light and fluttered gently. But the most surprising detail of all, which astonished the demons so much, and shocked the cherubs, was the power that emanated from what Isaac materialized in front of them. It was divine energy in its purest form. Before anyone could say anything, they all saw Isaac extend his hands in front of him, more specifically in front of the pedestal with his own, and another explosion of smoke occurred, and another item appeared. This item, while less amazing in appearance, was still just as amazing in that it was an angelic halo, and not just in appearance if the energy emanating from the item was any indication. The three cherubs were too shocked and confused to speak, and the two costume demons were in a similar state, only unlike Vortex, Verosika was going through Isaac's notes that were in the notebook, though she didn't understand much. Isaac did the same thing again, but this time what looked like three pedestals appeared, but with the same element it changed color. It was the infinity symbol, at least an almost three-pointed triangular version of said symbol, which only differed in the color, one golden yellow, one BLD red, and one sky blue, and they all seemed to be made of solid light. What they could notice is that all the pedestals were aligned in an L shape, with all the objects floating. After that, in Isaac's hand, an object materialized from a smaller smoke explosion. They couldn't quite see it, but it seemed to be a metal ball, nothing special beyond a couple of black circles, one attached to the other giving the appearance of the classic infinity symbol. Isaac concentrated for a moment, closing his eyes and then opening them, lifting the sphere, and as he did so several explosions of smoke appeared in order in the L of elements, 3 to the right and 3 below. When they ceased, 3 copies of each object complete with pedestal had appeared, now having a total of 12 items. Nobody said anything, because nobody understood what was happening. Although they were amazed, they looked at what Isaac had done. What did he do? And why? Cletus asked, both amazed and very confused, as were his fellow cherubs. Amazed that the boy summoned not just one, but several objects containing holy energy, but multiplied them, creating identical copies not only in form, but in divine essence. "Isaac, are you okay?" asked the worried succubus. Seeing the boy who seemed very tired, he just nodded. After catching his breath, he went over to where Cletus was and tugged on his arm, and Cletus let out a slight "whoa" as Isaac led him to one of the pedestals, specifically the one with the blue infinity symbol on it. Cletus looked at the strange floating object, somewhat confused. He didn't know exactly what he had to do. "Wait, you want me to grab it, right?" he asked, to which Isaac nodded with a smile. Cletus reached out his hand with some hesitation, and at last took the object from its pedestal. As he held it, he could feel that it was hard and soft in texture, as well as warm, and holding it did something inside of it. Feeling restless, anxious, excited but in a positive way. Suddenly the object shone for a moment and vanished, confusing the cherub. Huh? Where, wow? Cletus began before exclaiming in surprise as he felt a surge of energy within him, as if the inside of his entire being had risen in power. The only feeling he could compare it to was a powerful feeling of inspiration and happiness, as well as accomplishment, similar to the one he had when he first came up with the idea of creating cherub. In addition to that feeling, he could feel that the divine energy was filling him completely again. It felt like before he and his family were expelled from heaven. And although overwhelmed by the sudden sensation, he could hear, like the others, a kind of chorus that came from everywhere, all for a few moments. He could hear the gasps of his fellow cherubs, although he did not understand why. Look, Colin said, pointing over Cletus' head, and the Puto looked to see what his fellow lamb was pointing at and was surprised to see what appeared to be some sort of signboard hovering above him and Isaac. On the poster in large letters, you could read, "The Soul," and below you could read the phrase, "I am all." The signal disappeared for about a second afterward. The Soul. I am all. What does it mean, huh? Cletus began to ask only to stop when he looked at himself, and got another surprise, although it was less since he saw that he was now covered in a blue aura, something that his fellow cherubs also noticed. Cletus? Are you okay? Kini asked, somewhere between fearful and curious. Yeah, I feel great, better than I've felt in a long time. She looked at Isaac and he had a bright smile of happiness and pride. Seeing Cletus say that, went to Colin and Kini, and did the same as with Cletus, putting each of them in front of them. He put Kini in front of the red symbol, and Colin in front of the yellow symbol, the cherubs facing each other. They wondered for a moment why he didn't give the yellow sheep the yellow symbol, but they paid no attention to it. Kini grabbed the red symbol, and the exact same thing happened to her, only unknown to her, he didn't feel it. Same as the cherub baby, for she could feel her body better than ever. This is amazing, she gasped as she felt the power filling her. With Cletus, it looked like a sign above her. In large letters you could read, "The body," and below it could be read the phrase, "I feel all." The body, she said, confused, a sentiment shared by everyone except Isaac. Whoa! Kini, look at your arms. Cletus exclaimed, surprised to see his angelic companion. She looked at herself, and let out a gasp, since indeed, just like Cletus, she had a visible change, only instead of being a blue aura, her arms looked bigger and more muscular, and she could feel that his whole body was the same. This is both weird and amazing. I feel like I can split rocks with my bare hands, she said excitedly. Looking at this, Colin began to think out loud. This sounds familiar. If Cletus has the soul and Kini has the body, then it must be the mind. Colin said, grabbing the symbol. In his case, the blue lamb could feel the change, the divine energy filling his body and soul once more, but the most notable change he could feel was in his head. He could feel his mind transform, and his perception of reality and surroundings. Though the change was also so new that he could feel his mind go hazy and his head go numb. Wow, this is very unexpected and interesting, he said as he looked up, to see what the sign said. The mind, and below it could read, "I know all." Colin looked at those around him, and noticed how his companions and the two disguised devils looked at him strangely. Colin, feeling alright? Cletus asked. I feel a little numb from the neck up. Well, your head will look weird, Kini said. At that, Verosika took out a mirror from her bag. Here, she said as she handed the hand mirror to Colin, who upon seeing the change the object made to him, his eyes widened in shock. Now his head was triple its previous size, with visible veins. This seems, Verosika began. Awful? Colin asked. I was going to say painful, but if you can add that, she said rather awkwardly. I suppose so, although in the end it is logical considering the changes in my teammates, he said. After a moment of silence, Cletus approached Colin. "Do you want to change? It seems that it is awkward," he asked his partner. "Yes, a little, but are you sure? And can it be done?" he asked, to which they all turned to look at Isaac, who looked at them all in confusion for a second, before realizing that the question was for him. To which he approached Verosika, who handed HRT the notebook to write down the answer. "Of course," was what he wrote. "And how do we do it?" Cletus asked, to which Isaac wrote. "Just focus on the item, reach out and think about taking it away." After reading that, both Cletus and Colin started to do it, and although it was difficult at first because of the newness of the situation, in the end the object, or item as called Isaac, it appeared floating in the hands of each one of them, and as they did so they could feel the power leaving them, and they felt weak and incomplete again. Cletus quickly took the symbol from Colin, which he now knew was the mind, and the blue lamb coincided with the soul, and the change occurred in the same way as before. And while Colin lost his huge head and gained the blue aura, as for Cletus, those present were surprised, since they didn't see that his head grew like that of the blue lamb. "Huh? This is weird, why didn't you grow your head?" Colin asked. "Didn't it?" Cletus asked, confused, because he could feel the change the mind made in his body, and was surprised that Keeney claimed that he had no physical change. Colin handed Cletus the mirror that Verosika gave him, and Cletus was surprised, because although he had been physically changed, this change had been almost minor, since the only thing that was seen were pronounced veins, and that was all. "This doesn't make sense, not that I'm complaining, but why isn't my head bigger?" he said as confused as the others, especially Colin. "I guess it's because you were stubborn enough before, and it was physically impossible," Verosika said, eliciting a series of laughs from everyone except Isaac, causing Cletus to look at her with a look that made it clear how little he appreciated those words. "Ha ha ha, that's so funny," he said sarcastically. "Well, she has a point," Keeney said. "Really? My head isn't that big. Is it?" he exclaimed a bit indignant. "Actually, I meant that you're stubborn. After all, it was your idea to carry out your project, and even if those in heaven are opposed you carried it out, but yeah, your head is literally big too," Verosika clarified. This caused another wave of laughter, but in this case, after laughing, they decided to move on to the next items, which were the halo and the strange ball of light with wings. When they grabbed the angelic halo, the only change they felt was that the power in them increased. They felt stronger, faster, smarter, more everything. This time, the only change is that their previous halos, which were cracked and dull, were replaced by the gold halo they grabbed. The halo, all stat up. As it was pretty explanatory, they didn't pay much attention to that detail, since they were more than not at all surprised by how their halos had changed, such an important and essential part for them, and now that they were bigger and golden in color, it brought them happiness to recover and apparently improve their halos. They felt more and more complete. And finally, there was the last item, the most striking of the three. They hesitated for a moment, both because of the appearance and the power that emanated from the object, the same as the previous ones because there was not a hint of infernal power, or something that indicated that this was a hoax, and that was what made them doubt. What if they were making a pact with the devil without realizing it? What if this was all a hoax? They looked at each other, and after a while they nodded. If this was all part of Lucifer's plan, they would congratulate him for fooling them so perfectly. So, they set out to take the object. It was somewhat difficult, since how do you grab a ball of luz with a wing and cloth? They grabbed the ball of light between their hands and it disappeared after a while. Nothing happened at first, before the sign that appeared with the other objects appeared above them. Revelation, and below it said, "Awaken your faith." Seeing no change, as did the others, he confused them all, both the cherubs and the demons, except for Isaac who only looked expectant. It was something fast and intense, because when the cloud and the smoke dissipated, they saw the result of the boys' plan. And while Isaac laughed and jumped with excitement, Verosika and Vortex gasped, and their eyes widened at what they saw, and the confusion was added when they looked up and saw the sign that appeared above the three cherubs. For their part, the reaction of the three cherubs was similar. They were in mutual astonishment at the changes, not only internal that they felt, but also physical. The wings were small before, now they were so big that they made the wings they had before look like those of an insignificant mosquito, but now they could easily wrap themselves or another person their size with them. The cloth that used to wrap the ball of light now wrapped around her melons, cascading over her shoulders, past her feet, and seemed to have not only merged with her garments, which were now pristine and clean, like the cherubs themselves, but instead changed color to match. The most striking were the eyes, although the pupils and iris remained unchanged. In addition to glowing, the sclera now lit up with a golden-colored energy. They could also notice how the physical changes that the body and the mind gave Colin and Keeney disappeared, leaving them as they were before, at least externally, because they could still feel those items. And finally, the three were enveloped in an aura of gold. Meanwhile, they felt that they possessed a power that they never thought possible, an enormous amount of sacred energy that emanated from within them. The only way they could describe it, was like a fraction of an infinite fire that never goes out, and that was now inside them. They looked at each other in astonishment before looking up, and being even more astonished beyond the word, to see what the sign said, which only had one word in very large letters. Seraphim. Isaac jumped up and down a few times before clapping his tiny hands together. It worked. It really worked. The three cherubs were going to be fine. He had done a good thing for someone from heaven. He felt that he was finally a good boy. Surely with this, he would show heaven that he and the others were worthy. The three cherubs exchanged glances. Holy guacamole, was all Cletus could say. We have ascended. Keeney exclaimed. So, you got a promotion? Verosika asked with a raised eyebrow. Congratulations. I think. Vortex said with a shrug. Both demons did not fully understand the situation. They believed that all the astonishment of the cherubs was because they had transformed, but it turns out that being promoted was more shocking, and that confused both of them. Noting the unawareness, on the part of the demons, the cherubs let go of massive surprise and shock, at least enough for Cletus to look at them and ask the two of them. Wait, promoted? We weren't promoted, we were ascended. And to Seraphim. We were promoted to Seraphim of all ranks. Keeney exclaimed with her voice still filled with disbelief and astonishment. We are now angels of the third sphere. Do you have any idea what that means? Colin asked the hellhound and succubus in disguise. Verosika and Vortex looked at each other and then at the cherubs, shrugging in confusion. No offense, but we don't really know how things work up there, beyond the annual purge. Verosika said. The cherubs upon hearing this, the three cherubs, or rather, seraphs, looked at each other for what should be the millionth time in the day. So who explains it to them? Cletus asked his companions. I guess it will have to be you, Keeney, and I still need some time, said Colin, who, like Keeney, hadn't gotten over the situation. Cletus floated towards the demons ready to explain the situation. He was still assimilating the huge surprise and disbelief that the whole matter of having been ascended to Seraphim meant. He inhaled and began to speak. First you have to understand how the hierarchy of angels works. We are supposed to be 9 orders, distributed in the spheres, being those of the first sphere the lowest category, and the angels of the third sphere the highest, and not for less, since they are those who directly serve God, and those who are above the rest, has been understood up to now. Cletus asked Verosika and Vortex. They nodded, so the Seraphim continued. Well, the long and short of it is we kind of are promoted like so high up that basically there's only 2 entities that are above us, one of which is God himself. The cherub explained. That left Verosika and Vortex stunned silent for a few seconds. Verosika sputtered, for her mind was working overtime to the millionth power, trying to process the news and the implications. Dying, Vortex would have said DMN, but he was careful to watch his language in front of the child, and the truth was all he could say. We'd basically be there to cheer the Lord on as he does his great work, in addition to being his confidants among other things, but I dunno if we'll be able to do that now, since we're exiled, Colin explained. Colin is right, we're still banished, but we're definitely way stronger than any old exterminator. Kini remarked. And we owe it all to this little fella, said the angelic lamb full of joy and happiness, as well as gratitude towards the little boy. Yeah, Kini's right, thank him, Cletus said, trailing off slowly, as his face turned analytical, and then he turned to a look of realization. While the cherubs were explaining the situation, Verosika was more and more in shock. For every word they said, it was a bomb that they threw at the succubus. She already knew that little Isaac was a box of incredible surprises, and when he said to help the 3 expelled cherubs, she didn't know what to really expect from Isaac, although the most insane thing that occurred to her that he would do, would be to mix somehow little Chad's powers, with his hourglass, or something, but take 3 fallen angels, and raise them so much, that the only one who has more authority than them is God himself. To say that this was surprising was the wrong thing to do. It would be surprising if any of her exes, idiots they were and still are still alive despite how despicable they are, but this that Isaac had done. This was something that went beyond being simply amazing, it was something that left Verosika almost completely speechless, especially because of the huge implications. She only had one thing to say. But how? Both Cletus and Verosika exclaimed at the same time, looking at each other in surprise at such perfect timing. Okay, obviously we both have questions, some that urgently need answers, so let your Cletus begin, she offered, to which the angel began as everyone's attention focused on him. Okay, we've been ascended. I'll ask the most important and obvious question, how did this guy, Isaac, get to ascend us? Verosika started only to stop, since she didn't really have an answer for that. Cletus is right, no angel has been promoted like us in eons, sure, some angels can be promoted by another, but the only one who can promote an angel to seraphim, or any other from the 3rd sphere is, Colin continued but stopped. Kini finished for her partner, and despite how vague he was, everyone except Isaac understood who the angelic lamb was talking about, which caused everyone who did understand to open their eyes in shock, especially the angels. Or so we thought, and that's why it doesn't make sense, the only way Isaac could ascend to us, is if he was Cletus started only to be interrupted by Verosika. Let's see, wait a minute, I know what you're going to say, and let's not rush, she said quickly. But don't you understand that we would be in the presence of Colin tried to say, but Verosika interrupted. Okay, listen to me, I take back what I said earlier, said the pop star succubus, seeing where this was going. Before jumping to hasty conclusions, and starting to say and do something stupid, by just a long shot. Verosika interrupted the angel, to prevent him from saying everyone who wasn't Isaac knew he was going to say, and for many reasons, all very good reasons. But Kini was going to speak, but was interrupted, only this time it was Cletus, who raised his arm in front of her. No, let her continue, maybe she's right, said the angel. Kini was going to insist, but decided to keep quiet when she saw the look that the childish angel gave her. Seeing that she could continue, Verosika continued. Look, the situation is this, I know you want answers, and so do I, believe me when I tell you that I am as surprised as you are, but believe me when I tell you that he is not who he thinks. This last one was a half-lie, she actually did not want to believe in it, because if that were the case, the whole matter had been complicated at cosmic levels. And although there may be answers, believe me when I tell you that we cannot ask you directly, if you want an answer I will give it to you, or at least everything I know, but as I said before, it will be when Isaac is not present, and that is final. Verosika said, and despite the fact that the seraphim wanted an answer, in the end they decided to accept the terms. Okay, we get it, let's do that, but we really need an explanation of all of this, Cletus said pointing to himself, as well as his companions. Very good, Verosika said smiling, for now, although we have questions, I think it's obvious that you should thank Isaac for, well, saving your lives, but nothing exaggerated, said the succubus, and they all looked at Isaac, who was looking at the whole thing, curious but also with a small smile. Isaac for his part was still very happy for having helped the angels. He did not understand much of what they said, but from what he knew, their biggest problem is that God had abandoned them, and without the power of heaven they would die. Isaac couldn't let them suffer, so he decided to share some of the cool stuff he found in the basement, just like he did with Mr. Tex, but since they were angels, then he had to give them the items he found in the angel room. It was more difficult than he thought, not because he didn't have one, but it seemed that he had all the things that he used to find in the treasure rooms. The difficult thing was knowing which one to give to each one, but after thinking about it, he decided that the best thing is that he would give each one a halo, a revelation, and to each one he would give the mind, the body and the soul, after doubling them, so that each one would have one of each, and he will not run out of his own. And it worked. It really worked. And now they looked more angelic than before. Although things got a little confusing, because they looked very surprised, Isaac thought it was strange, and then they started talking with Miss Verosika, but he couldn't pay attention, because while they talked, he kept the stuff that was left. Isaac noticed that now the objects worked and looked a little different than before, although he didn't understand why. By the time he finished, he returned to the conversation. All he could hear was Miss Verosika telling the angels that they had to thank him. "Don't have to tell me twice." Cletus eagerly pulled Isaac in close, wrapping an arm around him, and rubbed the top of his head with a grin. "Boy, I can't thank you enough, little fella. You really pulled us out of the fire there. We'd be in a real pickle if it wasn't for you." Colin was next. "That's right, thank you, Isaac. We owe you our lives," he said sincerely, putting a hand on his shoulder. Isaac smiled, but was quickly pulled from the touch of the two male cherubs when an enthusiastic Kini snatched him up off the ground and into her arms, squeezing him tight and spinning him around, practically manic with glee and relief. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," said Kini full of happiness and emotion, while Isaac was lifted into the air by her in her arms, in a strong but gentle hug, trying to convey all her gratitude to the little boy, who didn't save her life and that of her fellow angels, but also promoted them. Whether or not Isaac the father, both Kini and the others, will be in eternal gratitude to the little cutie. At that moment, as she hugged him, Kini noticed how extremely light Isaac was, to the point that she felt that she was carrying a sack of feathers more than a living being. She knew that she was much stronger now, thanks to Isaac's gift, but this didn't make sense. The boy's weight felt almost non-existent, and she suspected it wasn't just because of the extra strength the body gave her. She would have to ask Verosika about that later. Isaac was surprised at first by the sudden show of affection, but then he began to laugh with happiness at the show of gratitude from the angelic sheep, feeling the love, the happiness, as well as the softness of her fur and clothes. So, Isaac's only response was a laugh filled with a joy equal to Kini's, and the hug in return. Verosika and Vortex watched the whole situation move, but Verosika couldn't help but think about all that it implied. There was so much to discuss and ask, but she couldn't do it directly, without causing Isaac a mental breakdown, from having to relive the worst moment of his life. And that was frustrating, now more than ever because of what she saw Isaac was capable of. Verosika was never philanthropist, charitable, or even qualified as a decent person or anything like that to her. Not for nothing was she a succubus born and raised in hell, but that didn't stop her from feeling happy and proud to see how the boy helped others, not only at her expense, but also inspired by her. I wonder if that's why the princess is the way she is and she does what she does. Verosika thought in her mind, and if that was the case, the succubus would not only understand her, but would genuinely respect her, not only for her being the daughter of the king and queen of hell. Even so, Verosika had to have a very serious conversation with Isaac, although what she did was right, and it was something truly noble. Giving any stranger objects of great power, which turned them into divine beings, was something that had to be stopped. I'll have to talk it over with him in the car, back to hell. Thinking about this, she realized another detail, and that is that she was no longer alone with Isaac. She now had 3 new members in the crew, and she said that the members were 3 angelic beings brimming with divine power. To say that she would attract attention would be an understatement. She watched as, after a while, Kini gently lowered Isaac to the ground, as she returned to her group. So, she decided that it was better for her to deal with those 2 problems now. She went to where Isaac was with the angels, and she lifted the child up in his arms, to face him. "Okay, Isaac, I have to tell you something and it's serious, so pay attention," Saying this, Isa looked at her carefully as she began to speak. Although I'm very proud and amazed at what you're capable of, keep in mind that you can't do that with. We were lucky that the three of them had no bad intentions against us, but who knows what would happen if it wasn't the case. Verosika said, referring to the now seraphim. Isaac inclined his head and took the notepad from him, then wrote on it before displaying a message. But what if others need help? Is it wrong to help them? Verosika thought about it for a moment, before answering. Well, no, it's not bad to help someone who needs help, just be careful if we ever get separated for any reason, always remember to be careful, you never know what someone's intentions might be until it's too late, that's why you shouldn't give your cool stuff to just anyone. So, what can I do, wrote Isaac. I guess it's not mandatory to give your items to help others, so you can still use them if you need to. I don't give my items to strangers, but can I use them? Verosika sighed and smiled fondly. Yeah, I guess that was pretty clear. Isaac smiled when she received the message from her. It's okay, I'll do it. Very good, honey. Now as for you 3-inch, he said, looking at the three cherubs, we have a little problem, and to put it bluntly, you are literally overflowing with pure holy power, where we are going would draw attention, almost as much as seeing Lucifer himself walking the streets. And why exactly is that a problem? Kini asked. That can attract unwanted attention, said the disguised succubus. And that could put Isaac in danger, Cletus deduced, to which Verosika nodded. But don't worry, we are stronger than ever, thanks to your wonderful gifts we are now seraphim. There really is little that can stand up to us. Kini told them. Yes, but first, don't let it go to your head, you also don't know the limits of that power, not even if you really are a seraph or not, if we are getting confused, she replied. She's right, Kini, at the moment we can't be sure, although if we had more information about it, Cletus replied to her, then looked at Verosika, who quickly replied. And even if they were seraphs, that doesn't make the problem any less. Besides, we already talked about this before, I'll give you all the answers I can, but it will be later, when Isaac is not around. So, what do we do? I don't know, can't you? I don't know, reduce it or something, asked Verosika with some doubt. Regulate it? Colin asked, and like Kini and Cletus, the angels thought for a while, and Cletus was the one who answered. We could try, and immediately afterwards, he concentrated on the objects inside him. He could feel the power that emanated from them, and he could feel that it was something similar to summoning his crossbow, only instead of attracting it, what he decided was to decrease it by concentrating and using his thought. The others watched as little by little, as almost all the angelic features disappeared, while Cletus slowly lowered to the ground. They also felt how his power disappeared until it almost disappeared, being almost completely invisible. By the time he finished, all that was left was the scarf, which was floating around him, and now that Cletus saw it more clearly, it felt not just like clothing, but something else, and he checked it when he thought about moving it, and he was surprised to see that he could move it at will, as if it were some kinds of extra arms. Whoa, he said upon discovering what he was capable of, he decided to wrap it around his neck and shoulders. His fellow angels saw what he did, imitated him, and in a matter of minutes they were in the same position. How do you feel? Verosika asked curiously. Well, a little numb, but nothing like before, Colin said as you wrapped his bow as a tie, using his mind. Yeah, the power is still there, but more peaceful, so to speak, Kini said while doing the same thing, only in this case, hers was a huge bow tie on her back. Well, at least that way they don't draw unwanted attention, they could go through hell completely unnoticed. Verosika said. Yes, but since our wings are also hidden, we will have to use our legs more often. Cletus complained. Yeah, like everyone else, but don't worry, walking is good exercise, and those will suit you, said Vortex. Well, when you're at my house, you can use your wings, and we can also go to remote places, both in hell and on earth, to practice flying, among other things, is that okay? Verosika proposed, to which all three enthusiastically attended. Fine, she said smiling, as she picked up Isaac, who in turn had little Chad and his notebook in his hands. Now let's go back to the car. The faster we get back, the faster we can clear some things up. Verosika said. It wasn't an order, but surely everyone obeyed it as such. So, without wasting time, everyone got into the car, and left the place. All without realizing security cameras, which recorded the entire situation from start to finish. Isaac sat quietly in Verosika's lap, looking out the window with a smile, happily enjoying the sights that had been denied him for so long. He liked being in the city. It was a very nice place. He raised little Chad so that the little thing could see the landscape better, which he let out a fascinated cry. On her side, Verosika was looking at Isaac, who was still enthralled and fascinated with his friend, by the world beyond the window. Although this particular city was not a big or outstanding place, for him it was clear that it was a new world. And fascinating. Which didn't make much sense in Verosika's mind, since he, despite how young he is, shouldn't be so fascinated by the place, so he attributed it to being locked up. Verosika wondered how long he was trapped. This was another question to be added to the long list of questions that need answers. The succubus looked at the little boy and the little friend of his again, and saw how fascinated and happy they were, how much fun Isaac was having, despite the fact that he was just looking out the window. Did you know? The answers will come. For now, I'll enjoy taking care of this little one. He deserves to be happy after all the SHT that happened, she thought, as she hugged him and patted his head with the intention of bringing him closer to the window. Although she stopped when she did this, because when she caressed his head she noticed something, and that is that the boy's head was a little rougher than before, so she saw better, and she realized that the boy was beginning to grow hair. It was small and almost imperceptible, but it looked a light whitish blonde. She smiled happily. Even though Isaac was very cute and cuddly even when he was bald, with hair he would undoubtedly look even better, and Verosika expected him to have long and abundant hair. The number of hairstyles that would make Isaac even cuter was almost infinite. Once he finished thinking that, she raised him up, so that he could see the landscape better, allowing Isaac and his companion to be near the window, and the effect was almost immediate, since the child could now see better, and therefore was more fascinated. Everything was amazing to Isaac, and that was greatly distressing to the succubus. Such simple sights, and he was acting like he was in a magical land filled with candy and toys. Still, she fought the urge to frown and just pointed out various sights as they went by. From the garbage fast food places she had a soft spot for, to the bowling alley, to the places she told him she never wanted him anywhere near despite the pretty flashing colors, such as casinos, or places where people wear little clothing, other than the beach or pool. She told him about the world he had missed out on. Isaac paid attention to it all, giving a nod or an ah-ha when it came to directions, and acting amazed and fascinated by the sights he saw around the car. Verosika then realized something wonderful, and that is that, now that her musical tour was over, she could take a vacation to show Isaac the world, from the best and different parts of the world. Although there was the problem that since she just finished the tour, her time on Earth, before she got into trouble, had already run out and she had to go back, so she would have to spend time in hell before being able to go out into the world. But that was not an impediment, since Isaac first has to see and get used to her new home. While this happens, she could show him the most appealing and healthy places in hell. Places where a kid his age can have fun without getting hurt, mentally scarred, or the like that awful park in Lulu Land. She grimaced at the mere thought of bringing him to that dump. Her own mother had taken her there as a little girl and they had both wound up coming home covered in various different injuries from the trashy rides, and she heard they got some new clown mascot, and honestly, just straight up F clowns, she hated the creepy BSTRDS. With their makeup plastered faces and their obviously fake grins and their big stupid red noses that she just wanted to punch as hard as she could until it was nothing but a red smear. Was this because Blitzo was a clown when they were dating? Most likely. She stepped out of the car, looked around where they were, inspecting the zone, to make sure no one was watching. The place was a zone on the outskirts of the city, an open field with nothing but desert land, where there were only a few plants, dirt, rocks and little else. From the car, the three skydwellers looked around before turning to Verosika, who pulled out a kind of crystal. Then she pointed it in front of her, and as soon as she did that, a laze shot out and a few meters away, there was a portal with the appearance of several joined rhombuses, revealed what looked like a city on the other side. Isaac looked at the portal with surprise and amazement, a sentiment shared in part by the angels, although to a lesser extent than the boy, because they already knew that the inhabitants of hell visited Earth, but it's how they do it, it's still impressive. Isaac had already gone through portals before, it was not something so new, since he had card reading, which gave him the option. Although it wasn't exactly similar to what he had, and that made him surprised. Verosika then entered the portal with Isaac, and shortly after Vortex and the angels, along with the car, before closing the portal. "Well, Isaac, welcome, this is hell," Verosika said as he walked through the portal, showing Isaac around the city, confusing him greatly in the process. Isaac looked around, and then scratched his head when he saw the place where they were, and wrote in his notebook. "Is this hell?" Verosika giggled into her hand. I know, it's not quite what you were expecting. There's not as much fire and brimstone as the Bible leads you to believe, and we don't exactly torture the sinners here for all eternity like you might be expecting. Unless they get themselves in over their head." Vortex chuckled. Yes, so try and be careful who you associate with, you four," Verosika warned Isaac and the three cherubs. "We'll be on our guard, Miss Verosika, ma'am." Cletus responded with a salute. "Very good. Well, we can take off this costumes now." Saying this, Verosika put Isaac briefly on the ground. "Stay here a moment," she said before her and Vortex, before being briefly engulfed in blue fire, revealing their true appearances, somewhat impressing the angels in the process, by how different they looked, but not that much. Unlike Isaac, who still wasn't quite used to it, but seeing Verosika in her true form, she still seemed impressive to him, although she couldn't help that she still seemed very pretty. Suddenly he thought of Mr. Vortex and was curious what his appearance was, and the only thing he remembers is that he was a creature with hair, because the first time he saw his true forms, Isaac was distracted by Verosika being the angel, red, and he see that the red angel was a demon. So, when he decided to look, and when he saw him, he let out a small gasp of surprise. The others only caught a glimpse of Isaac gasping in surprise, followed by a childish gasp of excitement, before running towards Vortex, whose sudden action caught him by surprise. He could see Isaac jumping with excitement, but besides that with his arms outstretched towards him, full of emotion and happiness. At this point Vortex was even more confused by Isaac's reaction, even more so when the grip entered the boy, and he hugged Vortex while stroking his head the best he could, due to his size. The hellhound blinked owlishly, then chuckled and returned the affection with a friendly head pat. "Ah, looks like the little guy likes dogs, eh?" Isaac nodded his head. "He likes dogs, cats, birds, rabbits, just about any animal really." Verosika chuckles in amusement. "Heh, from the looks of it I'm pretty sure cats and dogs are his favorites," said Vortex. "And how are you so sure?" Keeney asked. Vortex didn't answer, because he was impressed with the pure love, appreciation, adoration, happiness that emanated from the little boy he held in his arms, all directed at him. And what impressed him was that he could literally feel the boy's feelings, like someone feeling the heat of a campfire, and this was something Hellhound had rarely felt. The closest thing to Isaac's feelings was his girlfriend, who in a different way loved him with the same intensity and vice versa. Everything was so intense, sincere and wholesome that Vortex could only smile and wag his tail happily, while he smiled and stuck out his tongue, in a show of happiness that took Verosika by surprise, since it was the first time she had seen the Hellhound so happy. For her part, the Seraphim found the scene very heartwarming, as well as surprising. Who would have thought that the first thing they would see her arrive in hell would be an interaction as appealing as this? Unfortunately, the scene was promptly ruined by a passing imp, who barked out a laugh at the sight. "Ha! Look at that drooling dumbass stupid face. Want a biscuit ya fa dash?" Verosika promptly shut him up by ripping a stop sign out of the ground and using it as a bludgeoning weapon to smash him upside the head, eyes narrowed in rage and teeth gritted. "Should have kept your DMN mouth shut," she seethed. After saying, She hit the imp with such force that she sent it flying far away. Away at such speed, that if it weren't for the brake, but because he smashed like a cannonball into a building, he would have been out of sight. She sighed, then searched for a place to dispose of the now dented and crooked sign, spotting a nearby trash can where she dumped it. She was about to return to his group, when she saw that something else or someone was violently thrown into the garbage can. The subject stood up trembling violently, with green skin, gray clothes, metal mask and red hair, clown hairstyle. He came out of the dump holding the traffic sign that Verosika had discarded. For a moment Verosika prepared to fight, when another sinner appeared, dressed in black with his face covered, and red goggles, and brought some kind of sword with ones and zeros. And apparently the same guy who threw the clown into the dump, given how he started to fight him quickly, exchanging blows and clashing their weapons, with mastery, even if the clown's weapon was just a traffic signal. At one point, the sinner with the red goggles pounced on the sinful clown, throwing himself into the garbage can, which because of the blows began to roll down the street until it was out of sight, leaving as quickly and suddenly as they arrived, and Verosika could only think that even for hell, those guys looked weird. Verosika downplayed the event, and returned to his group, and saw their expressions of astonishment and utter shock, on the faces of Vortex and the Seraphim. "I didn't know she could do that," Colin told Vortex. "Me neither," he said, just as surprised as the Seraphs, and wondering why his boss hired him, if she's capable of hitting an imp into the stratosphere. Isaac blinked like an owl, then clapped his hands to encourage her. Given what he'd been through, he was more than used to this kind of violence, which helped protect him from it, so this really wasn't anything new to him. However, it was the farthest and fastest he had ever sent an enemy, and she did it without any synergy. He thought Miss Verosika looked so cool while she did it too. Verosika for her part smiled, amused and flattered by the group's actions, especially Isaac's. Although she would have to talk to him, using violence to protect yourself is fine, especially in a place like hell, for him to use it, the first option, mainly because it could end up upsetting the wrong person. And while the succubus knew that Isaac was special, she didn't know the real extent of the boy's power yet. On top of that, she doesn't want Isaac to become but addicted to violence, like most Wrath residents. Of course she wants him to be strong and learn to defend himself, but she didn't want him to be like those rednecks. She had made the mistake of dating one of them. Never, ever again. She took the boy back from Vortex, hugging him close and gently tickling under his chin like one would a cat. He kind of reminded her of a cat, actually. He was small and quiet and extremely cuddly, and he had those big eyes too. Cletus then walked over to her and tugged on her clothing to get her attention, which worked. "So what do we do now?" asked the Seraph. "Well, we have to go up to a meeting in the building here, a few floors up to organize some things and dash." Suddenly, Verosika was interrupted as she heard her phone ring as she received a message on the phone. She took it out of her pocket and read the content. "Oh, it seems not anymore, the meeting has been cancelled. Something about a fight between a couple of freaks who left the offices destroyed and a pile of corpses, so while they do the cleaning and repairs, I am free." "Great! This allows us to go straight to my house without any hassle. So come on, let's get back to the car." Without arguing, they all entered the vehicle again, leaving the parking lot, passing through the guardhouses on the sides of the exit, which was a gate that looked elegant as if reinforced in its design, guarded by two demons that looked similar to the gate, fierce, large and well-armed and corpulent, more similar to soldiers in everything except the uniform, than to guards in a parking lot. They had to hire men like that to take care of the cars. After all, it was the hell, and the place where famous people like her used to go, so this level of security was needed, or else you would be robbed or worse. Still, that didn't stop someone suicidal enough, lucky enough, determined enough, or sent flying in from somewhere else to jump in from time to time. Isaac and the three angels looked in amazement and a little intimidated at the corpulent and armed demons, although it seemed that they could squeeze them like oranges with their hands. Or at least it would have been like that for the three angels, before Isaac gave them their gifts. For their part, the demons that guarded the entrance only gave them a quick glance, curious about the appearance of the four children, but in the end, they returned to their own, as soon as Verosika caught their attention. "Thanks, here's my ID and this is for you guys." He handed them both a check each as a tip, and with a smile, both at the payment and at recognizing her, they opened the heavy gate, allowing Verosika and the group to leave. After leaving the parking lot, Verosika put Isaac in the back next to the angels, and then she checked the news from the Pride Ring. She looked for the route less traveled, not because it would be faster, at most it would be the opposite, but it would be the least prone to an accident, turf war, mugging or some other disaster, and when she found it she indicated it to Vortex to go that way. At another time this wouldn't have mattered much to Verosika. Of course she wouldn't actively look for danger, but she wouldn't mind taking risks, but now that she had Isaac and 3 others, she preferred to play it safe a little more than before. In any case, in addition to Vortex, she had some weapons in the car, reserved for whatever denizen of hell she thought was her lucky day. When they set off, and while they reached their destination, Isaac and the angels looked out the window at the entire scene, with shared feelings, since the 4 of them felt resignation and sadness to a lesser extent, but also amazement, relief, and hope. Resignation and sadness, because they are in hell, despite everything they did to avoid being here, and even though things are not half as horrible and disturbing as what they had told him. Even in the message that they were in a place where only moral failures, those condemned for eternity, the worst of the worst, years and years of propaganda, provoked feelings, which were not going to go away in a short time. Deep inside Isaac, a voice full of hate and despondency told him that he was finally where he belongs, like the filthy and impure being that he is. As for astonishment and relief, they were because of how hell looked. Of course, it was not an ideal place, it was noticeable that it was a dangerous place, but it was not the twisting place of fire and the screams of eternally condemned and tortured souls. In reality, at least as far as they had seen, it was a huge, glittering city, bustling and full of lights and glowing billboards. Although when the angels took a closer look at what most of the posters said, they were very shocked, since the vast majority offered DRGs, SEC, and the most harmless was junk food or a random product. Isaac, being very small or because of the situation in general, didn't seem to notice. The seraphim wondered what Verosika would do to raise the child in a healthy way, in a place like this. And while a part of Isaac had already surrendered and accepted his fate, another hoped that everything would be better from here on. Despite how impossible it seemed, it was not the first time for the child that something impossible had been achieved. For their part, the angels were in a similar situation. They really hoped they hadn't been mistaken, they hadn't been deceived, and that Verosika really is the decent person she appears to be, and that what awaits them is actually the opportunity to build a future better. As at the moment the route seemed safe as expected, Verosika decides to get distracted and look at the passengers in the back. They could see the astonishment on their faces, but also a feeling that she could not identify at first glance. She thought of talk to them but decided that it would be best to arrive first, and then talk to them separately. Another thing she noticed was that while the angelic lambs, Colin and Keeney, were leaning out the window, the apparent leader of the group was sitting, hands clasped, thumbs twiddling, his face deep in thought, staring to nothing, and momentarily diverting his gaze to look out the window, at Isaac or at her. Verosika let out a soft breath and clenched her fists. She really hated the fact that good people had to suffer like this while the absolute sum of the earth always seemed to get away with their crimes. It was always something that bothered her and was a major contributing factor to her drinking habits. Isaac and the 3 angels were all examples of this. They were all wholesome, lovable people who just wanted to help others and be cared for in return, and the world seemed to want to get them for it. She reminded him of some friends that she had lost. Now that was 2 topics she hadn't touched or thought about in a long time. Even though it had only been 3 weeks, it felt like 3 years since Verosika drank a single drop of alcohol, and anyone who knew her on a personal level, and not so personal, would be surprised by this fact, because her alcoholism it is well known, as well as the disasters that she came to cause on some occasions when she was drunk. Nobody would believe that Verosika could go more than half a day without a drink, and that she would never stop drinking. In fact the succubus herself believed it. Or at least until she met Isaac. If there was a time in the life of the succubus, in which she most wanted to drink, it would undoubtedly be the first 2 weeks since Isaac came into her life. It was the most difficult moment of her life, a time not only of change, but of increasing stress, not only because of her work, in fact, thanks to the fact that they had recently finished the tour, she was almost free. It was Isaac, or rather, what she was discovering as she delved deeper and deeper into the child's damaged mind, the horrors he lived through, the constant panic attacks, the nightmares, how he cried, writhed and urinated on himself, being attacked by demons and monsters that were not in another place that was not his mind. As well as not knowing if he would survive without the machines, otherwise he would have a relapse, if his injuries had caused him worse physical damage, which had not been seen. And that too, was the only reason why Verosika no longer drank, because of him. She didn't want Isaac to see her drown her sorrows in alcohol, she didn't want him to believe that an escape for all her pain was drink. And if Isaac tried to drown his sorrows in alcohol, or used any other drug to relieve the pain, considering everything the boy went through in his short life, trying to suppress all that trauma and pain would end up destroying Isaac completely. That is why it was imperative for Verosika to stop drinking, because if she didn't, he would most likely end up killing him by setting a bad example. That's not to say it was easy for her, especially to stop so abruptly, but her extra motivation helped. Besides, she didn't want him to see her drunk, no child should see her mother like that, much less a child like Isaac. Besides, she didn't know why, but something deep inside Verosika told her that if Isaac saw her drink, things would get even worse. As for the friends that Verosika has lost, the road to fame is not easy, and she has had to sacrifice a lot, including people she had to put aside. That without counting some of those who died in the annual purges or at the hands of crime. The worst part is that this was one of the other reasons for drinking, and that also caused her to partially or totally no longer remember the faces or voices of many of them. Trying to ease the pain of loss, she has destroyed their memories. Until almost completely forgetting them, and she can do little or nothing to recover them. Still remembering them hurts, especially the ones she had lost at the hands of that bstrd Crimson. Oh, how she wished she had the power to just go down there and wring that monster's scrawny little pencil neck until it popped off its tiny head. Her friend had worked under the mafia leader as a maid. She had been treated poorly and walked all over by the predominantly male staff, and she had her suspicions that they had done some truly unspeakable things to her that she refused to talk about. And then one day, she was missing. She didn't see her again, and while nothing was ever confirmed, she just knew she had done something to offend that evil, twisted imp that resulted in him taking her to that little spot of his. She'd gone down to verify for herself, and indeed, she'd found some of her friend's clothes floating in the water. That was when she'd started drinking even more. It didn't help that it had happened so soon after the bad breakup with Blitzo. No, Verosika definitely had to teach him how to avoid those things. She might not be able to teach him how to avoid losing friends, or the pain of loss, but Verosika could definitely teach him that using pain-relieving drugs was not the way to go, as well as avoiding getting involved with horrible people romantically. Talking about drugs can come first, anything related to romance can come second. I doubt Isaac is going to have any experience with that anytime soon to need advice. Verosika told herself in his mind, and then she saw one of the angels in the rearview mirror. Although maybe one of them could use it, she thought with a smile. Before she could continue with her thoughts, Verosika saw how they were arriving at their destination. She perked up in her seat, realizing she had a lot of introductions to do. Her staff needed to know their new little MSTR, after all, and also the trio that what were the three angelic beings going to be to her? Would they just be living in her house as guests? Maybe she could hire them on as staff, she was fairly short-handed. Verosika saw her mansion. From the outside it was a mixture of appealing architecture, with a mini fortress, something required for anyone in hell who can afford it. Although according to the one who sold her the house, the place where she was located was quiet and peaceful, and she would rarely encounter any trouble or catastrophe. Verosika evidently didn't believe that real estate salesman, after all he is a real estate salesman. But since in the time that she has been living, there has not been any problem, she was surprised to find one of them who was telling the truth. She let out a sigh and put her hands on her peach. Home sweet home. She cheered. Come on, kiddo, let's go. And give you and your friends the grand tour. She threw the door open with a dramatic flair and sauntered out, making her way to the front door and slamming it open. "I'm home." She called out only to hear a groan. Looking over, she saw a well-dressed imp lying on the floor, rubbing his nose. "OCRP. Sorry, Skrell, didn't think you'd be that close to the door when I opened it." She was quick to apologize to her head of staff. "Don't worry my lady, I'm fine," she said, getting up, wiping his uniform with one hand while rubbing her nose with the other. When the pain quickly faded, and he saw that nothing was broken, he looked at her boss, and the imp noticed that apart from Vortex, there were 4 other new individuals, who looked in awe all the same size, apparently all of them children but with a different appearance. 2 of them were the most normal in the eyes of the imp, since they looked like lambs, a female and a male, at first glance, but what caught Skrell's attention the most were the other 2. Skrell both looked very human with big eyes, the same small height, and although they both looked cute, they were also very different, one with a head and the other looked like a miniature version of Lucifer himself. Both children were the most striking, each one for different reasons. The shaved boy is the one who called Skrell's attention the most, not only because of his appearance and the fact of being alive, as well as because of the strange aura that emanated from him, but because of who recognized him. He must be Isaac, the boy Mrs. Verosika told them about. The other powerfully caught the attention of the imp, not only because he looked like a miniature version of the Lord and MSTR of Hell, but also because he had no information about him as well as about the lambs, since Verosika had only told them that she would arrive with Isaac. For their part, both Isaac and Cletus, Colin and Keeney were impressed by how the place looked. On the outside it looked very nice, but inside it was even more so, with an extremely elaborate and detailed decoration. White and gold stood out, along with the other colors. Although it was not the same as the sky, it was still really impressive. At least that's what the 3 seraphim thought, when Isaac was more impressed, because he had never seen such a big and appealing place. The closest thing to that were the rooms of the angels that were in the basement, and partly the cathedral, although less broken and without ugly things. He was grateful that he was used to navigating big and complicated rooms, because finding his way around might have been a little bit confusing otherwise. He held on to Verosika's dress with his tiny fist as she carried him forward. Skrell composed himself and let out a soft sigh. "Ah. So, this is Isaac, huh? Nice to finally meet you, kid. Miss Verosika told us so much about you, you know." Isaac beamed, happy to know that Miss Verosika thought highly enough of him that she wanted to tell her friends about him. The boy looked with interest at the creature that gave him the greeting. Because of the color and size, it looked a bit like a redder and smaller version of Miss Verosika, and it seemed as nice as she was. When he was in the car he saw many similar creatures through the window, along with others that looked different, and while some were scary, others looked very pretty. He got to see children and even babies, and some reminded him of Lil Loki, because of the color and how cute they were. Isaac wondered if they could also shoot in 4 directions like or summon exploding flies like Loki. He will ask Miss Verosika later. He reached out his tiny hand to Skrell in an attempt to shake it, and Verosika dropped to her knees seeing what she wanted. Skrell took his hand gently, making sure to treat the boy as gently as possible, and they shook hands slowly before he turned away from him with a smile and a nod. When he shook his hand, the imp was surprised, because he could feel a strange sensation running through his body. It was like those few times he managed to shake hands with a powerful overlord, or some member of the royalty of hell, only he didn't know felt threatening or dangerous. No, it was rather something more calm, meek and pleasant, but he didn't think about it much, since he quickly got out of his surprise and told Isaac. "Ah, he's a good boy. He has good manners. Definitely much better than me when he was his age." Skrell chuckled as he released his hand, nodding, well remembering his youth, always the rebellious type who put nerds in lockers. This boy seemed like a healthy little man. He doubted anyone around him would have to worry. "Yeah, that's not much because it would be like saying that someone has more dialectic than Groot or Hodder," said Verosika jokingly. "Oh, come on, lady, I wasn't that terrible either, at least not more than any child from hell," Skrell said. "That's not what I've heard," she said tentatively. "Yes, it really would have been a great loss, but putting that aside, tell me, are all the employees here? I want Isaac to meet them all in person, Verosika asked. Last time I checked we were all there, but let me check in case someone inadvertently left. Skrell said while taking his phone, to verify that everyone was there, sending a message to the group chat. While he waited for the answer, he took a look at the extra unexpected guests, 2 lambs and 1 boy who was very similar to Lucifer. There was something that looked very familiar about them, but the imp couldn't figure out what. They felt off, not demonic in nature, and not human either. It was weird. After being under the curious gaze of the imp, Cletus decided to break the ice and approached. Nice to meet you, buddy. My name is Cletus, and we are, He turned to look at Verosika, silently asking her if he should keep the secret or not. Verosika considered that if she entrusted his life to his staff, they could handle this information, but when she was about to tell Cletus that she could tell him no problem, she stopped and had an idea. You can tell everyone the truth, but I recommend that you wait until later, when Isaac goes to sleep. When I tell you everything, I haven't told you about Isaac. I plan to gather everyone so that you can take advantage of telling them what you think. Cletus waited a moment, and then nodded. Sounds like a good plan, he said with a smile, which was shared by Verosika. Well, they already answered, Miss Verosika, everyone is here in the mansion. Skrell caught their attention. Okay, now who did we get to first? Verosika wondered. Suddenly, a red and black blur rushed in, and another imp ran in, standing rigid and saluting like a soldier about to go to war. I'm here. Hi Miss Verosika. She dropped the salute and grinned widely. Is he here? Do I finally get to meet the little cutie? Show him to me. What's his favorite food? I have to cook it tonight. She pleaded eagerly, hopping back and forth on her heels. Settle down, Ronia. Yes, he's here, and you can meet him, but first you need to take it easy. Verosika said with a small chuckle. Isaac thought about it for a moment, but in the end, seeing that the imp had no bad intentions, he nodded. And with great emotion, and letting out an excited squeal, Ronia gave him a strong but soft hug. Even though she wanted to give him a crushing hug because of how cute he was, Ronia had already scared him before, so she held back for now. While the female imp was still holding the child in her arms, they parted a bit and Isaac looked at Ronia better, now that he had her closer to her. She was almost as tall as Skrell, but while the male imp was slimmer, Ronia was much chubbier, attire that consisted of a baby blue dress, heels, an apron with straight hair. In addition, another thing that she was able to notice is that while Skrell had a type of perfume, Ronia smelled in different ways, none bad on the contrary, although none that he could identify. If Isaac had asked Verosika, she would have answered that Ronia smelled like cookies, pancakes, turkey, fried foods and other different dishes, only he didn't know because it had been a long time since he had eaten dog food, or in bad condition. Status, or the rainbow cookie. Hospital food did not count, because it was mostly vegetables and diet bread. Grr. Although Isaac's brain did not recognize Ronia's smell, his stomach did, a sound that was heard by everyone present, surprised by how loud it sounded. Ronia let out a loud gasp and donned a smile that threatened to tear her face apart. Ooh. Ooh, he's hungry, that means I get to cook, yes. In a single blur of motion, Isaac was suddenly back in Verosika's arms and Ronia was no longer in the room, having scrambled to get to the kitchen to get started on Isaac's first meal. I actually have another very special friend that works in here. She explained to Isaac as she opened the door. Esna did practically live in the library, but for some reason saying it out loud felt rude. Well, either way, she opened the door. And predictably enough, the tiny but appealing imp let out her signature frightened squeak when she entered and hid her face behind one of the books she was holding. Don't be scared, it's me, Enza, and I came with some guests so you can meet them, but don't worry, they won't hurt you, Verosika said calmly. Hearing this, Enza peeked a little above his book, still holding it as if it were a shield, to better see what Verosika was referring to, and there she saw 4 unknown individuals, apparently all children. She slowly pulled the book down beneath her face, feeling somewhat better about the situation. Children. Children were good. She could deal with children. They were well not as scary as adults where it was hard, but she could do it. Hi, she squeaked out, looking down at the ground nervously, the book still held in her hands. The silence lasted a while because they did not know who would answer first, but Colin decided to take the first step. Hi, he said as smoothly, calmly and friendly as possible, so as not to scare the imp even more. She was barely taller than him, and you could see that she was nervous. So he had to avoid scaring her, and it seemed like his plan was working, so he continued. My name is Colin and these are my friends, this is Kenny, he pointed to the yellow lamb. Hello, she said, waving at her. He's Cletus, he said, pointing to what Enza thought was a miniature version of Lucifer, something that made the imp a little nervous, but generated a lot of questions, as well as a sense of familiarity. Hi, I'm Cletus, and this, he said pointing at the boy. This is Isaac. Esna looked at Isaac, and she clapped her hands over her mouth. Oh my gosh, it's you, it's little Isaac. I am so sorry, I hope you don't think I'm being rude, I should be more welcoming to Miss Verosika's, she stopped when she realized she wasn't sure what Isaac was to Verosika, and this made her feel the need to apologize again. Sorry, she looked down bashfully, hands clasped behind her back. Isaac tilted his head in confusion, he really didn't understand why the tiny lady was apologizing to him. For some reason her behavior seemed very familiar, like, the boy knew she had seen him somewhere, but she couldn't tell where. Meanwhile Verosika couldn't help but notice the parallels between Verosika and Isaac. Both equally quiet, equally shy, equally sensitive and even had the same height and everything. And that's not to mention that they both liked something related to paper, Enza reading and Isaac drawing. She laughed softly into her hand, and Isaac and Esna both looked at her with their heads tilted to the side, matching expressions of curiosity on their faces. Verosika snickered even harder when she saw that. Oh my gosh, you two, you're just too adorable. She exclaimed, picking Esna up off the floor in one arm as the other held Isaac, hugging them both tightly. Colin and Keeney watched the scene with a smile. The first one turned to see Cletus, but when he did, he looked strange, he had a face that mixed sadness and concern lightly behind a small smile. Something happens? Asked the blue lamb in a low voice. I'll tell you later, let's not ruin the moment, he said quickly. Colin wanted to insist but decided to leave it at that. He agreed with Cletus not to ruin the moment that Miss Verosika was having with the boy and the imp. The boy looked at Enza for a moment, and then at hers around her, looking at the large library, before grabbing her notebook and writing something down, then showing it to Esna. Can I come draw here sometime? Esna tilted her head to the side. Oh. Oh, of course, why you don't have to ask, why you're the young MSTR of the house after all, she said softly, twiddling her thumbs and looking down at the floor. Isaac clapped his tiny hands together happily and excitedly, and she smiled at that. Verosika cooed at the boy and gave him a gentle squeeze. Ah, you're sweet, Esna. Esna let out a squeak and looked away with a blush. While this was happening, Skrell received a message. Oh, it looks like Ronia already has the food ready, he announced. Okay, so let's go to the dining room, from there we just need to see Summer and Diameter. Verosika said, putting Esna in her chair. Oh, they are there too, helping Ronia to set the table, the imp informs the succubus. Oh. Excellent. Then with more reasons, see you later Esna, she said as she headed for the exit followed by Isaac and the angels. Bye-bye. See you. See you soon. Kenny, Colin and Cletus said goodbye to her respectively, while Isaac said goodbye to her waving her hand. A gesture imitated by Esna, who with a small smile said goodbye to them. As they walked down the hall, Verosika picked up Isaac, carrying him in her arms. By the way Isaac, why did you ask Esna if you could draw in the library? The succubus interrogated the boy, curious about that request. The child looked at her with concern before writing, did I do wrong? What? No. 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 Nothing like that. It seemed a bit curious to me, that's all. She quickly responded when she saw the boy's response, who upon receiving it, her face changed to one of relief before writing the response. I saw that she looked very lonely. Verosika blinked at that and tilted her head. Oh, she really did? She asked softly. Isaac nodded his head and looked back at the library with a sad frown, and she kicked herself for not seeing it with her own eyes. I'll have to make sure to visit her more often. Gosh, can't let the poor girl go without company, can we? Say, if there's a spot open for some help in the library, Colin here loves books. Used to work at a library before we started our business. Maybe he could lend her a hand. Cletus offered. Colin blinked, then felt slightly bashful at both being put on the spot and Cletus' sudden praise. Seeing Colin's expression, Cletus widened his eyes in understanding and quickly said, "That's if you want, of course, it's not mandatory," he told him. "I'll think about it," Colin said. Excellent. After a few minutes they arrived at some large doors which revealed the dining room, a large table with a appealing pink tablecloth with gold details, with matching chairs, and full of food, with an incredible appearance and aroma. The three former cherubs were in awe at the sight. It was befitting of heaven itself, and the aroma was only adding to it. They couldn't imagine what kind of meal the chef had cooked up for them to eat. Ronia was hurriedly getting everything set up with a wide, toothy grin, clearly ecstatic that Isaac was going to be trying her cooking. Suddenly, two very appealing girls came out of a door, both dressed in maid uniforms, and with plates, glasses and cutlery in their hands, which they placed on the table. The four saw that one looked a bit like Verosika but with short black hair. The other girl had the appearance of a humanoid cat with light brick red fur and dark brick red hair, straight, long and abundant. "Oh, just the ones I was missing, guys. I present to you Summer and Gia, my newest employees," Verosika said, pointing to the girls who upon hearing the succubus turned to greet her. "Oh. Welcome back, Miss Verosika. Just give us a second to finish preparing the table, and we will be with you soon," Gia said, who with Summer finished arranging the cutlery, plates and glass, as well as helping Ronia to bring what was left. Once that was done, they approached the group made up of Verosika, Skrell and the succubus's guests, who to the surprise of the girls, had 3 extra guests that they had to know and not just one. Gia was about to ask about the 3 unknown faces, but her girlfriend promptly interrupted the question by immediately getting excited at the sight of little Isaac. "Oh my gosh, he's so adorable, he looks like a brand new little baby, I love him." She cooed quietly at the boy, hands on her cheeks, eyes sparkling in pure delight. Gia smirked in amusement. Her girlfriend was right, the boy was very cute. She should have known she'd react like this, she was obsessed with cute. Verosika tried to tell Summer to go easy on Isaac, so that the same thing that happened to Ronia wouldn't happen to her, who ended up scaring him with her energetic attitude. Only to see how Isaac let out a gasp of happiness and very familiar surprise, while he extended his hands toward Summer with joy and excitement, implying that he apparently wanted her to carry him, something Summer did with joy. And to her utter surprise, Isaac not only hugged her with an excited arm, but Summer felt the little boy begin to scratch her head. Not only was she surprised to feel that, but she could feel something else, something appealing and warm coming from the boy, something that made her feel so happy that she began to purr. Something that was very surprising for those present, except for Isaac, who laughed with happiness. Verosika was puzzled for a few seconds, before it all clicked with her. Her eyes widened, and she bit her lips slightly as she remembered one of the stories Isaac had drawn for her while he was stuck in that hospital bed. He used to have a pet cat named Guppy that he was very close to. And the unhinged psycho that had hurt him had killed that cat in a fit of blind fury. Isaac's love for cats had never faded despite what happened to Guppy though, and he always showed glee when cats were involved. So being picked up and cuddled by an anthropomorphic cat girl was probably a dream come true for the poor thing. Gia looked at the whole scene, until now there was only one person, apart from her, she was the one who had seen her girlfriend purr, which would be Verosika. Gia looked at said succubus, tilted her head to the side, and gestured with her hand, pointing at the two, silently asking what was wrong. Verosika frowned and mouthed, "I'll explain later." Gia saw the interaction between Summer and Isaac again, which was as surprising as it was touching, because seeing his girlfriend act that way was a very clear sign of femininity and joy, and also seeing Isaac so happy was something that made the maid succubus very happy. Summer decided to attend to little Isaac, cooing him softly and gently scratching his back with her nails, being very careful not to accidentally cut him. On Isaac's part, the boy was very excited. At first, when he entered the dining room, he was very impressed not only with the beauty of the place and how big it was, but even more with the enormous amount of food that was there. It was so different and varied, but above all it smelled very good. But soon his attention was distracted when two new people entered and surprised him. Although they both dressed the same, both were girls, and both were very pretty, they were very different in appearance from one another. The first was a demon very similar to Miss Verosika, although she looked thinner and a bit shorter, as well as having short black hair, but the second one was the one that caught Isaac's attention the most, at first because she didn't look like any of the inhabitants he had seen so far, but there was something familiar about her, and the more he looked at her, the stronger she became. That feeling, and then got a better look at her appearance as she approached. He was a little scared at first, but being close to her allowed him to see her much better, and that's when he saw her face, as well as her tail and ears. She was a kitten. A big one, with such soft fur, and it smelled so good. She was like Mr. Tex, only while he was a dog, she was a kitten, and that couldn't have moved Isaac more. Especially when the kitten began to act happy to see him, she reminded him a lot of hers, friends of hers, cats of hers, Guppy, Tammy and Cricket, but especially the first one. Even she started purring when he hugged her and started scratching her head, in the area that Isaac knew all cats liked. Summer was basically putty in the boy's hands at that moment, closing her eyes and leaning her head into his gentle touch with a soft giggle as she allowed him to gently scratch behind her ears. She ordinarily didn't let anyone besides Gia touch behind her ears if she could help it, but something about this boy was different. He was so innocent, so pure and sweet, that it just felt right to allow him this rare privilege. And it certainly helped that he had little magic hands and knew just the right spot to scratch in. She took a seat in one of the chairs and continued to cuddle him against her shoulder as he petted her. Grr. This moment could have lasted for hours as far as Isaac and Summer were concerned, but the sound of his stomach managed to get the cat girl's attention. "Oh. You're hungry," she said, surprised, so with enthusiasm and dedication, she decided to get up and accommodate Isaac in the chair, as well as prepare everything for him to eat comfortably. She sat him down in the chair that had a booster seat set up, then carefully organized the utensils for him, taking the time to explain what each one was for when he looked confused, not being used to using such things, as he listened to her with rapt attention and nodded along. Verosika put a hand on her hip and smirked in bemusement. It seemed Isaac was making fast friends with the entire staff already. Good. She was so glad to see it. She smiled happily, seeing that, then went to the table, and sat next to Isaac, while Summer still happily attended to the boy. She was about to ask Isaac what she wanted, until she realized that of the ancient cherubs, who had remained. "What are you doing there? Why don't you take a seat?" she asked. "Really?" Colin asked hopefully, as well as his classmates who, although they hadn't said anything, could be seen in their eyes. "What? Did you think I brought you here so you could see how we ate?" "Of course not. Take a seat," she said as the cherubs took their place. She noticed how they wanted to be as close as possible to the boy, so the three of them sat in front of him, with Cletus in the center, Keeney on the left and Colin on the right. The three cherubs looked around the room. It was nice that they were already considered so close to the point where they were allowed to eat at the same table as the head of the house and her trusted servants. Back in heaven, it was custom to give the servants their own designated eating areas in their living quarters. This felt like a family meal, something they hadn't had in a very long time, Cletus especially due to his distant parents. The newly ascended seraph thought more about the matter, something that he actually did a lot lately, thinking a lot and in detail about things, constantly reflecting, and realizing various things that he was unaware of before. In this case, how were relationships in heaven, more specifically how were family relationships in heaven? And the more he analyzed how the general scene was there, the more and more he was convinced that something was not going as well as he was led to believe. He believed that it was normal for parents to be estranged was something normal, and it was. It was quite common for parents to be distant from each other, with few or no interactions or displays of affection. Heaven was very regal and strict in following the rules and regulations, and being a Puritan was still an extremely popular trend. Something that Cletus or any of his friends paid attention to, at least not until they met the healthy families in heaven and earth. You could tell that they were freer and looser in their way of living life and afterlives. There was a quality and energy that in heaven, for some reason there wasn't. It's only now that Cletus realized why. The newly ascended seraph thought more about the matter, something he actually did a lot lately, thinking a lot and in detail about things, constantly reflecting and realizing various things that he wasn't aware of before. In this case, what relationships were like in heaven, more specifically what family relationships were like in heaven. And the more he analyzed what the big picture was like there, the more and more he became convinced that something was not going as well as he had been led to believe. He believed that it was normal for parents to distance themselves, it was normal and so it was. It was quite common for parents to be distant from each other, with little or no interaction or display of affection, but that only applied to heaven. In heaven, being very neat, puritanical, strict and straight are some of the foundations of society. Something that Cletus or any of his friends paid attention to, nothing like that, they were born and raised there, why would they see that as something to highlight? But all that changed when he and his friends were banished and left to fend for themselves on earth. Heaven was much harsher than he had realized, denying his people so many basic pleasures for the sake of maintaining their sense of order. Hell wasn't exactly ideal, but it was free. Its inhabitants were allowed to love and be loved freely. He remembered the two imps that were part of the group that had banished them, and how they had passionately kissed during their fight in the theater. He, like the others, saw this type of behavior as debauchery. Almost everyone in heaven saw how those in heaven and especially those in hell, as mere beasts driven by their impulses and little else. Their freedom was not freedom, but dirty, harmful, deviant, corrupt and twisted debauchery for which they deserved to be seen as less than those who were in heaven, more those of hell than those of earth, because unlike the first, in the second if there was the opportunity of salvation and redemption. But when Cletus was banished from heaven, this vision began to change. At the beginning, being together with his friends exiled and abandoned on earth, with no one to lend them a hand, his way of seeing the things of the three did not change much, in which case everything got worse, when hatred and recognition began to fester, and now Cletus noticed that it got worse in that church. But even so, when he looked beyond, he could see the healthier interactions between humans, little by little that changed. It was noticeable that they were increasingly free in their way of living life and the afterlife. There was a quality and energy that in heaven, for some reason there was not. Only now did Cletus realize why, and now Cletus discovered that the same thing happened in hell, though to a lesser extent. Ever since he met Verosika and Isaac, the vision he had of the three realms was broken, especially the one of hell. Of course, many things that he told him and his friends about hell were true, that it was a chaotic place, where much of the sum of the earth ended up, and that they were given to their pleasures left and right, without any shame. Even while he was in the car he could see a lot of it, from signs announcing non-puritanical things, to explosions and collapsing buildings far in the distance. Could easily be deceived, but if so, then he would have to congratulate them, for being so good at lying. But from what he could see so far, that didn't seem to be the case. He needed more information, to ask more questions, even though he knew he had to wait until later to ask them. "Boy, is something wrong?" a voice took him out of his thoughts. What?" Cletus asked, a little confused, having been taken out of his thoughts by a voice that belonged to Verosika. No, it's okay, why? You haven't touched your food, you just stared at it without saying anything for like 4 minutes, she said. Cletus looked down at his food, a plate made up of assorted meat, salad, and garnish. He didn't know when or how it got there. Cletus shook his head and put on a smile. Oh, it's nothing, I was just thinking a few things, that's all. Verosika didn't say anything, though she looked at him suspiciously before going back to what she was doing earlier, which was helping Isaac eat. And that's not to mention the other pleasures of the flesh. Yes, it's true, it's not easy and mistakes can hurt a lot in one way or another, but with common sense nothing bad happens and everyone ends up happy. Be that as it may, Verosika is glad that, against all odds, none of the three have reacted excessively negatively to Summer and Jia's displays of affection, beyond seeming uncomfortable. In fact, the succubus found it a bit, since it seemed more like the discomfort that a child would express, and not a Puritan. The fact that one of them looks like a literal child helps. Said child was the one that caught his attention the most of the three, especially because of how quiet and thoughtful he had been lately. He seemed to be the leader of the bunch based on what she knew, and if he was the one that kick-started their business of helping humanity see the good in the world, it wasn't unreasonable to assume that he was most certainly the one most interested in seeing and learning of now concepts, while the other two were most likely along for the ride. She had to wonder about Colin and Keeney. Cletus was taking everything in, he was taking clear intrigue in the world around him, but the other two seemed more skittish and uneasy. It was to be expected from divine beings condemned to hell, but she had to wonder just why Cletus was so much more interested than they were. Were cherubs naturally a nervous bunch? They were heaven's equivalent on imps, meaning they likely weren't very high on the chopping block up there, so maybe they had the subconscious fear of being overwhelmed by someone more powerful even with their recent boost in power. The truth wouldn't be so strange for Verosika if that were the case, it was the most logical thing to do, even more so being in hell, and even when the succubus had done everything possible not to seem like a threat. It was also logical to think that Cletus, being the leader and founder of that organization to help humans, is the least nervous, and the most interested. Verosika wondered if it was like that naturally, or the gifts Isaac gave them for saving all three of them have something to do with it. Isaac. She looked at the little miracle child she had saved with a warm smile. This boy was absolutely amazing. He'd healed Tex's long-ruined eye. He'd caused 3 cherubs to ascend to near godhood. What else was this boy going to do? How powerful was he? How would he stand up against some of the stronger entities of hell, like the overlords or the royal family? She immediately felt stressed out thinking about that, not liking the idea of Isaac dealing with such strong beings. Isaac, Verosika thought, and she looked at the little miraculous boy she had saved with a warm smile, as he ate happily, attended by Summer and Jia. Would he ever face some of the strongest entities in hell, like the overlords or the royal family? She immediately felt stressed thinking about it. She didn't like the idea of Isaac dealing with such strong beings, and she hoped something like that would never have to happen to her, at least not with the heavyweights of hell. He had already had enough pain and misery for several lifetimes. Isaac didn't really need to live through a scenario like that ever. In fact, Verosika hoped that no one in the higher-ups of hell would see what Isaac was capable of, and she would use him as a weapon in his power plays or something similar. Verosika shuddered at the thought, but she knew that Isaac couldn't hide forever. She knew that sooner or later, hell's elite would fix her gaze on Isaac. At least the succubus consoled herself with the idea that, with how chaotic hell was, the elites would not realize its power. Even more so after envy disappeared, Isaac would go unnoticed, at least during his childhood. His adulthood and adolescence it was not entirely clear if that would continue like this. Besides, unless Isaac did something really big, she wouldn't stand out even using his powers in public. Of course, there was the matter of the angels, the ascension, and what it meant that he had that capacity, because according to them three, there was only one being capable of ascending the angels to that rank that they now had. What if Isaac turns out to be him? Verosika asked herself, and she didn't like the possibility at all. There was so much wrong with that possibility. Besides, the possibility was too insane, and it could all be a big mix-up. The succubus preferred to think that it was just that, a confusion, and that he and Isaac had nothing to do with each other. Although even so, questions like how much power does Isaac have? And how far can his power go? They were one of the many questions that did not allow us to completely rule out many possibilities, including that possibility. She shivered slightly, but managed to hide it well enough, not wanting to worry her staff. She idly realized that there was a chance he would come into contact with one of the overlords, and the one she considered the worst of all, Valentino. After all, 2 of her staff were rented away from him, he'd want them back at some point, and Isaac had already bonded with Summer, so he wouldn't want to see her go back to someone as awful as he was. Although in theory, Verosika shouldn't worry about Valentino or his men knocking on the door, looking for Summer and Jia, not while she was still paying the rent for both of them, and Verosika didn't want that, she didn't want to rent the 2 of them, she wanted to buy them to free them from the overlord, but unfortunately that PMP moth was not going to give up his most cherished possessions so easily, so the only option was to rent Jia and Summer, while she found a way to free them. Unfortunately no luck. Although the pop star succubus hoped to be able to free them soon, find a legal loophole, but her lawyers have not yet found a way, in which to forever rid Jia and Summer of the PMP. Valentino will be a disgusting being, but at least he fulfills his agreement, and as long as she pays the rent for the 2 girls, he wouldn't take them, and it seems he was honest in that regard, because neither Jia nor Summer have returned to him. See, since Verosika acquired them, the infernal popstar didn't like to think of them that way, as disposable objects, but unfortunately it was the situation in which Valentino put them both, but at least on that side Verosika can rest easy, because if Valentino loves something as much as eroticism, it's money, and as long as she paid monthly, they were safe. Also the other inhabitants of the mansion, especially Isaac and the angels. With how cute they are, Verosika doesn't even want to think about what Valentino would do if he saw them. Sure, Isaac seemed to be a jack-in-the-box, but it wasn't clear how powerful he was, nor how far that power went. The same for the angels that the boy ascended. She is still not sure if the affirmations that they are so powerful, that only God is above them 3, could be a misinterpretation, and she was not willing to check any of that, making the 4 face an overlord, even less one of the 3 Vs, especially if said overlord was Valentino. He could only think of 3 others who were on his level, outside of anyone, Alastair, Vox and Velvet. Verosika hated the idea of Isaac getting involved with any of them or someone similar, and if that was something she and her family could avoid, she would do everything she could to achieve it. She had to protect her loved ones with everything she had from all the scum and trash that existed here, no matter how hard he got. She wouldn't lose anyone else. She couldn't lose anyone else. She couldn't take it, not again. She analyzed the whole situation, and she saw that what she had proposed would be very difficult. She had basically committed herself to something, which would inevitably lead her to face at least some of the heavyweights of hell. But looking at the scene at the table, at all the smiling and happy people, from Los Angeles Colin and Derry talking to Rania and Skrell, to Summer and Jia feeding a very happy Isaac, Verosika smiled. She knew one thing. That would be totally worth fighting for, she thought to herself. We'll see about that. But all here believe you. Verosika was a little surprised by that last intrusive thought, but she quickly realized that it was the doubts within her that had been spoken, so she ignored it. She tried to squash it down the best she could and get into the mindset that she could and would get this all taken care of. Anyone that tried to harm her or her family, she'd find a way to work around them, whether it was one of the 3 Versus, or Crimson, or even Lucifer himself. Actually, didn't Tex say once that his girlfriend was in a high-ranking position of power or something? Maybe she could be a valuable ally against the darkest forces that hell had to offer, Verosika thought, because if she really wanted to achieve that goal of protecting them all, she would need many more hands. Oh, if she only knew. That thought came to Verosika's head and the succubus agreed. Although Tex could speak 1,001 wonders about his girlfriend, Verosika didn't really know her, so she couldn't be so sure that her bodyguard's girlfriend could be an ally or not, since that the succubus did not know who his girlfriend worked for. She could easily be in a high position, with someone Verosika wants to avoid at all costs. The good thing is, the succubus trusted Vortex, and he really seemed like a good man and a good judge of character, so the chances of his girlfriend would be a person worthy of trust and a great ally, are very high. I have to talk to Vortex to schedule a meeting with his girlfriend as soon as possible, the succubus thought. Before thinking about it further, 2 very familiar sounds caught her attention. Poof. Pre-E. And there floating next to Isaac was the boy's little red friend, little Chad, much to the surprise of most of those present, especially Summer and Jia, who were the closest to the smiling creature, who looked at them with interested eyes. Her bright black eyes, and a smile. Jia held her hand out towards the little creature, and he eagerly nuzzled into it, closing his eyes and letting out what sounded like a purr, causing Jia to giggle softly into her hand. "He's so cute," she cooed, gently stroking little Chad's tiny head as he reacted much like an affectionate kitten. Summer reached over to give little Chad a light scratch under the chin herself. "Yes. Not as cute as this little dear though." She looked back at Isaac with a smile. "And what is this little cutie? And where are his arms?" Jia asked, looking at Verosika, waiting for the answer. The succubus was caught off guard by the last question. She looked at little Chad more closely, as Isaac fed him, and he responded with his characteristic excited sound, and there she saw something she hadn't noticed before, and it's which was true, it had no arms, just a pair of little floating hands. "He's little Chad, and he's a friend of Isaac's or familiar, as for his arms." "I don't know," was what she replied. Before she could continue, those present saw how little Chad put his hands to his mouth, and kissed the air, which caused the materialization of a heart, just like the one he gave to Vortex to heal him, leaving everyone more surprised than before. "Ah, that's adorable," Jia cooed, hugging little Chad close and nuzzling his face as he cuddled up against her and trilled happily. That kinda looks like a divine spell," Keeney remarked with a tilted head. "Yeah, I've seen some angels use it," Colin agreed. "Have you really seen an angel using it?" asked Cletus, quite curious. "Well, I think I did get to see a couple of times some angels wearing something similar, only the hearts would appear and then vanish instantly, but this one is still here," Colin replied. Cletus took a closer look at the heart and at the creature, both little Chad and the heart, both of which emitted an energy similar to divine, but was also different, as if there was something else mixed together, making it all feel very familiar. He quickly remembered that it was like the energy that the gifts Isaac gave them had, although with less intensity. Cletus put his hand to the scarf he had, and then on his chest, feeling that energy, emitted, discreet latent but present both from the piece of cloth, and emanating within himself. He gave the little boy and his red friend a small, genuine smile. He was a strange kid, that was for certain. Most definitely demonic in nature, yet at the same time, so pure, almost to the point where he was heavenly. He wondered how it worked. Cletus looked closer, and he could feel something else in the boy, something in between, that he couldn't quite recognize, but he seemed familiar at the same time he couldn't quite put his finger on. Over the course of dinner, while Isaac was being fed and pampered by Jia and Summer, his friend little Chad was creating more hearts, and gave one to each person. Each one gave everyone a warm, fuzzy feeling inside that made them all appreciate the boy and his little friends just that little bit more. Isaac was like a beacon of light in a pitch-black void. Something that just managed to bring joy and love wherever he went. "What did I do to deserve you?" Verosika thought as she smiled at him. "You saved him, and gave him all the love you could, without expecting anything in return, except that he be safe and sound." Verosika smiled at that thought, and it was true, she saved him from the hell in which he was unjustly, and had done nothing more than heal his physical and mental wounds, without expecting that there would be a benefit other than seeing Isaac healthy and happy, like a child as he should be. And the added benefit of being able to hold the cuddly little darling in her arms whenever she wanted and read him bedtime stories and sing him lullabies at night. She never imagined being a mom would be something she'd actually be excited about, but it was actually happening. She was eager to be a parent. By now it was more than obvious to Verosika that she wanted to be Isaac's mother. Despite the hell he had to live through, despite all the pain, misery, terror and torment, Isaac was such an incredible, kind, and cute human being, when he would have every reason to be cruel and evil. He could use those incredible abilities that he has for evil, but he still decided to remain someone benevolent. 3 weeks with him were enough for Verosika to love him so much that she wanted to make him her son. There was just one problem, she wasn't sure if Isaac wanted to see her as a mother or not. After all, the woman he had called mother all his life was a cruel, abusive monster of a woman that had done nothing but neglect him at best and hurt and abuse him on a bad day and actively tried to kill him at worst. She was worried that just the word mommy had negative connotations for him. Verosika has seen enough of the boy's drawings, and seeing Isaac's mother depicted over and over again, as not one but several monsters of different and grotesque shapes, makes it quite clear to the succubus that the boy does not have a vision positive of that word. Therefore, as much as Verosika would like to officially be his mother, she cannot, much less wants to force Isaac, in any way, for him to see her as a mother. The succubus doesn't like the situation at all, but she had no other choice. DMN that monster, even though she was dead she's still a pain in my butt, when I find her, I'm going to dash. It is here that Verosika widened her eyes in horror, remembering a detail. SHT. I haven't found that bee yet. She and Isaac could still meet again down here, was what she mentally screamed, while she crushed the